Yesterday we had George Pickens joining up with C.D. Lamb in Dallas, forming the best wide receiver duo in the NFC, according to our Tyler Sullivan, who covers the NFL. And like we saw last year with a lot of big-name running backs changing places, it's wide receivers in New Jersey this season. DK in Pittsburgh, Cooper in Seattle, Deebo in Washington, Davante in L.A., and Stefon in New England. We have B-Mac joining us from Atlanta. Bryant McFadden here, and he's going to tell us what the biggest wide receiver moves of the offseason were. He's going to rank them 1 to 5. We're going to start at 5. By the way, one of the guys that we saw there was not on this list. I'll tell you who that is when we're done. But we'll start at number 5 with a star who returns to his old division.
No question, it's Stefon Diggs signing with the New England Patriots. And the reason why I love this potential relationship with Stefon Diggs and the New England Patriots is because of their young quarterback. Just go back in time when Stefon Diggs once was a Minnesota Viking. The Buffalo Bills made it happen for him to be part of their organization. And just look at how it took Josh Allen to a whole nother level. If you're the New England Patriots, that is what you're visualizing. That's what you're hoping. Because you can say whatever you want to say about Stefon Diggs, but before that ACL injury, he was on pace to have over 1,000 yards in 8 games, roughly under 500 yards receiving, 496 to be exact, 3 receiving touchdowns in an 8-game span. So if he was able to put together a full body of health for the Houston Texans, clearly his price tag would have been higher, and he probably would be a Houston Texans. But because of the injury, his season came to a halt, and then allowed the opportunity for him to be a New England Patriot. So I love everything about this relationship because clearly they're in dire need of improving their wide receiver room. Stefon Diggs come with the experience, and he still has the playmaking ability. And the last thing I say about this move, it helps the team in totality because if you look at their personnel on defense, Chris, they have a playoff-ready team right now on paper defensively. If their offense can be consistent and develop, especially with Stefon Diggs helping out young quarterback Drake May, who knows what type of season the Patriots could have.
B-Mac, your Steelers made some moves. Obviously, the trade, George Pickens to the Cowboys, they get a 3rd-round pick in return. They made that move because they went out and made a move earlier in the offseason. DK Metcalf is your number 4. But the big question is who's going to throw him the football?
And that's why this is huge, because right now, we don't know who will be throwing DK Metcalf the football. But one thing we do know, this was a very, very important get for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were trying to improve their wide receiver room over the last 2 years. They flirted with the ideal of Brandon Ayuk. He stayed in San Francisco. They flirted with some other teams. And then came the opportunity to make a move to go get a wide receiver 1 in DK Metcalf. Now with them moving on from George Pickens, Chris, that makes this DK Metcalf acquisition that much more important because clearly there's a depth concern at the wide receiver position, and he is going to have to lead week in and week out to be able to get the best out of the passing game. So for me, that's why this is number 4. Clearly, if George Pickens was still in the forefront, this would probably be higher, but just being able to acquire a guy like DK Metcalf for the Pittsburgh Steelers was a huge need for their offense.
And there is a reason to think that his numbers could actually go up in Pittsburgh. More on that in just a second. But let's get to your number 3 wide receiver. And it's a team that was 1 win from the Super Bowl behind Jaden Daniels, adding a guy who does it, well, he can really do it in any way on offense. It'll be interesting to see how the Commanders use Deebo Samuel.
And you said it. They were 1 win away from playing in New Orleans in this past year's Super Bowl. Jaden Daniels had an outstanding year. Passing the football, he relied on 2 main targets, Scary Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. That number 3 option was up in the flux. But now with Deebo Samuel coming into their organization, number 1, healthy, because you already know health is very, very important for Deebo's success, and he's highly motivated. So now if you can throw him into that number 2 or that number 3 option, you will really fall in love with what this offense could do with Cliff Kingsbury calling plays and with their dynamic quarterback and Jaden Daniels. Like I said, he had an outstanding stellar year his rookie campaign, but he only relied on 2 consistent receiving options. In comes Deebo Samuel with the experience, and he still has the playmaking ability. Don't overlook that element with him. I think it improves Jaden Daniels, and most importantly, this move will improve the Commanders offensively.
All right, let's get to your number 2 wide receiver move of the offseason. It's George Pickens to the Cowboys. But B-Mac, a word of caution here. This is an interesting note from ESPN earlier today. No Steelers wide receiver, no wide receiver drafted by the Steelers has ever overperformed for his next team than he did with Pittsburgh. That kind of goes against logic. You'd think that in other offenses they could do better, but nobody has gotten better.
And see, the thing about that stat, one thing they forgot to mention, when those receivers left, Big Ben, when you look at Santonio Holmes, when you look at Martavius Bryant, when you look at Antonio Brown, those guys left Big Ben and didn't really upgrade at the quarterback position. Right? Mm-hmm. When you look at some of those moves, when they left, they didn't really upgrade at the quarterback position. Of course, Antonio Brown, there was an issue with his numbers because of the, suspensions and things like that. But when he left Pittsburgh to go to the Raiders, it wasn't an upgrade in the current quarterback position, if you were asking me. And I think the consensus would say that. For this situation for George Pickens, currently as we see it, Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson, or Dak Prescott. This is an upgrade, a dramatic upgrade, and that's why I have George Pickens to Dallas as my number 2 most significant wide receiver move this offseason. When you look at George Pickens in 3 years in Pittsburgh, 800 receiving yards, 1,100 receiving yards, 900 receiving yards. Chris, he was being productive with Mitchell Trubisky throwing him the football, Mason Rudolph throwing him the football, Kenny Pickett throwing him the football. 2 of those guys are no longer with the organization. And Mason left the organization because they felt like he wasn't good enough. But guess what? Because of the dire need at that position, he's back with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you're telling me George Pickens, with everything that was following him, associated with him, was still giving those type of numbers with that subpar production at quarterback, just imagine what he can do with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Ferguson, and the rest of the crew, especially that offensive line there for Dallas. And I can tell you this much, with the Cowboys, Chris, playing in the NFC East, you better have an offense that can score points. Because Washington, just talked about them, they can score points. Philly, they can score points, and they have a balance of ways of doing it. So that is super important for the maturation process for George Pickens, being involved with a great quarterback like Dak Prescott and everything else that's surrounding their offense.
Having said all that, B-Mac, I'm guessing that is almost exactly the same reason why you have Davante Adams ranked as your number 1 move, because who did he have at quarterback in Vegas the last couple of years, and who does he have at quarterback now with the Rams?
No question. I mean, this is a significant upgrade for Davante. And I'm saying that even with Davante moving to play with the Jets, because that Aaron Rodgers that he played with a year ago was not the same Aaron Rodgers that was throwing him touchdowns in Lambeau Field. This is the upgrade for Davante Adams. And even though the quarterbacking was a bit questionable a year ago for both organizations that he played for, he still had over 1,000 yards and 8 receiving touchdowns. So I love this move. When you look at his production, it's still there, and he's been more durable than the former Ram great Cooper Kupp. We know about Cooper Kupp when he had that Triple Crown season, historical year for the Rams, but since then, he's been in and out of the lineup because of injuries, and because of that, we didn't get a chance to see the amazing numbers that we know Cooper Kupp can put forth. When it comes to Davante Adams, durability hasn't been an issue for him, and the numbers haven't been an issue for him as well. So you put him with Matthew Stafford, that play 60 arm is still warmed up, along with Puka Nacua and the masterful play caller and Sean McVay. And you talked about how close Washington was to get into the Super Bowl. Let's not forget about the job the Rams did, not only getting into the playoffs, but giving the Philadelphia Eagles fan base a nail-biting situation in that NFC Championship game. Now they have Davante Adams that potentially could get them over their hurdle that they stumbled across last year.
Top 5 wide receiver moves from Bryant McFadden, as we've seen a ton of big names, former All-Pros, change teams this year. The one guy that we saw to open that he did not put in his top 5, Cooper Kupp, who is now, I guess, replacing DK Metcalf in Seattle. Also a trade for Christian Kirk to the Texans. We'll see if he can rejuvenate his career going from Jacksonville to Houston. But the number 1 move, Davante Adams to the Rams.